So I'll be the first to say that I really did not like Poplio when the first three starters came out, but I really do think Primarina has the best chance of being high tier and being a star in this Gen 7 meta. Its special attack is through the roof at base 126, which is absolutely insane. That's a great special attack stat to have. Even uninvested, you're going to be doing tons of damage. From there, its bulk is also respectable, not so much on the physical side, but on the special side, it's absolutely taking any hit you throw at it. And its speed is really the only bad part about it. At base 60, it's really not outspeeding much other than the very, very low speeds that we've seen come along in this generation. And base 60 is a pretty crowded speed tier, so it's going to be tying with quite a few Pokemon unless you invest a bit. And its base attack is really not that useful because its physical move pool is very shallow, and why would you run a physical move on this Pokemon when you look at that special attack? I mean, it's just so high. So the Water Fairy topping is a great topping for this Pokemon to have. It only has 3 weaknesses, and they're really not the most common types other than Electric in the current meta. A lot of Pokemon carry Poison, but since it's non-stab, you're almost guaranteed to take at least one just because of your good bulk, even if you're uninvested. From there, you actually also resist a lot of common typings such as Fighting, Fire, Water, and you're immune to Dragon types, which is very useful. For your abilities, unfortunately the 3 starters do not have their hidden abilities. And for this Pokemon, Hyper Voice would be a great move to couple with the Liquid Voice ability, but that's just not an option as of yet. So what Liquid Voice does is it turns all of your sound-based moves into water-type moves. I'm not sure whether or not they get a boost. I believe they do. And if they do, then that obviously means Hyper Voice is the best move to run with Liquid Voice. But until we get that, just replace Hyper Voice with either Surf, Sparkling Aria, Hydro Pump, or Scald, and then run Torrent. And that way, even when you get knocked down to very low HP, then your water moves are doing more damage, so it's not useless, it's just less useful. So the first set I have for Primarina is just an absolutely hard-hitting, just blow away your opponent type set. It's a wall-breaking set with choice specs, modest nature, absolutely maxed out special attack. You could run that 8 investment in speed instead of defense if you prefer, if you think you could outspeed your opponent, but that's completely up to you. But I highly recommend running most of your investment in HP and special attack. That way not only can you deal tons of damage and OHKO a lot of things, if not 2-hit KOing them, but you can also take some hits depending on what your opponent has in store. Your main moves should obviously be Moonblast for your Fairy Stab, and then Hydro Pump or Surf for your special stab. Now I have been seeing a lot of Primarinas running Sparkling Aria, but I really don't see much of a use of that over Surf, because the only difference is that Sparkling Aria can cure your opponent's burns. So it doesn't really make sense to me why you would run that over Surf, because they're the same damage. And even the Z moves are the same damage if you were to run the unique Z move over Hydro Vortex Surf. So really it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but if there's some reason, let me know in the comments. I'm just not quite understanding. Although it is a cool looking move, I mean, but still, that's not a reason to cure your opponent's burns. Your coverage moves, I think Energy Ball and Ice Beam are very strong options because they catch some types that may want to switch in on your other attacks. But there are some other special coverage moves you get. You can run Scald, but with the spec set you really want damage output over the burn chance. You want to do as much damage as possible. Your other coverage, you can also run Psychic or Shadow Ball if you would rather run that over either Energy Ball or Ice Beam. And really, they can be useful against certain Pokemon, but it's up to you on what your team needs coverage for. Like, if you're very weak to Pokemon like Salazzle, you could maybe run Psychic, even though you'd have the Water type stab anyway. Like, your stab covers so many types that your coverage is really not the most useful, because you'll almost always use either your Water or your Fairy type move. You could also run Blizzard, and if you're running a doubles team with Alolan Ninetales, then your Blizzards would be 100% accurate. And even if you were running, say, an Icy Rock Ninetales, you could still run a Blizzard Specs Primarina in the back, because you'd more than likely be in on the Hail, and it would be much stronger than the Ice Beam. And Hidden Power Ground is another decent option for anything that may want to switch in, but as I said before, Moonblast and your Water type Stab will be your biggest damage dealing moves. Now, for the bulky set, I would think either Leftovers or a Z-Stone would be what you prefer. Probably Leftovers if you wanted to stay around as long as possible. You want to run a Calm Nature to take advantage of your high special defense stat. Max out your HP, max out your physical defense so you can take those hits too, and give yourself a little bit in special attack. And then really you just need your two main stabs again, with Moonblast of course being always the best fairy move you can run. And then Scald for the burn chance and still decent damage. You run Toxic for anything that you don't burn with Scald, and things that you can't really damage otherwise, and then Protect to either get your Leftovers back or to just stall out your opponent's moves and cause their Toxic to do more and more damage. Primarina does have some other utility moves. One of my favorites is Encore, because you can trap your opponents into moves that they normally wouldn't want to be using. A good example of this is Pokemon that like to Protect or Leech Seed, such as Celesteela. If a Celesteela uses Leech Seed on you switching in, and then they think they're going to get a free Protect or Substitute or even a Heavy Slam on you, then you can just Encore them into that Leech Seed, and suddenly they're in a very bad position because all they can use is Leech Seed and it's doing nothing to you, and you can start popping off Scalds, trying to get a burn and doing some damage, and if you outspeed them, then you can just keep encoring them into that same move, and it's just so annoying. They're eventually forced to switch out, and Encore is a great way to deal with some of these threats, such as Toxapex and Celesteela and some of these super bulky mons that we're seeing in the meta right now. Perish Song is another good option to force your opponent's switch. What it does is when you use it, you and your opponent and anything else on the field, if you're in doubles, has 3 turns to switch out, or they will faint regardless of how much health they have left. And this is more useful in doubles because if you whittle your opponent's team down to just 2 Pokemon, then use Perish Song, you can switch yours out, Protect, do whatever it takes. As long as you keep your Pokemon alive for 3 turns, you win the game. Screens are another option. It does get both Reflect and Light Screen, but really I don't see it having room for these unless you get rid of Protect on this set. You can also get Rest and Sleep Talk to have semi-reliable recovery. You can run that along with your Moonblast and Scald. That way you would have access to both moves, so nothing could really wall you, and you could still get all your health back. Baby Doll Eyes is the last move I have on here. It's really not that viable, but if you decided to run a fully specially defensive Primarina, then you would be lacking quite a bit in your defensive side, and if a physically offensive Pokemon switched in, then you could run Baby Doll Eyes, which has priority, cut your opponent's physical attack by 1, and then they wouldn't be doing as much damage to you, but that's kind of situational and not what I'd recommend. Now, the last set I really have is a setup set for Primarina, and this one's a little iffy, but I kind of like the idea. And your main item would be either a Z Crystal, probably Waterium Z or Fairium Z. You could then run Citrus Berry or Agua Berry or any of the new berries. There have been a few berries that have been buffed from past generations, and now when you get knocked below 1/4 of your health, the berry will activate, but instead of doing things like what Salic Berry does and boosting a stat, they'll heal 50% of your health, which is substantial. And each one confuses you, but only if you're a negative nature of what they deem bad. So, say Figgy Berry, for example. It will heal you 50%, but if you're a negative attack nature, like most Primarinas are, you will get confused. So you'll want to run either an Agua Berry, you could run an Ipapa Berry, you could run a Wiki Berry. There's a list online, so I'm sure they're not hard to find, but I think they're much more useful than they used to be for sure. Now, this one would be a Modest Nature, similar to the first set we had, max health, max special attack, and a little bit in either defense or speed, depending on what you really need. Work Up is your only real setup move in this case, but it's not the worst, especially because you can take hits. You'd then want your fairy stab, you'd want your water stab, and then you'd want coverage. I put psychic here. You could also run hyper voice if you needed the extra water coverage once liquid voice comes out over your surf. You could run aqua jet because since you're using workup, you're actually boosting your physical attack too. And if you just barely miss a knockout, you could really surprise your opponent with a priority move. You could also run Hydro Cannon, which is Primarina's strongest move. It's 150 base power, similar to Hyper Beam. But if you run a Z Crystal with it, you do avoid the recharge turns. So suddenly it's a 200 and nearly 200 base power move, and that's before stab or your workup boost. So that's ridiculously strong if you really needed to get rid of one Pokemon, perhaps a Porygon Z or a Celesteela. You could also run Dazzling Gleam in doubles. It is there, but Moonblast in singles will always be your better option. Overall, I think Primarina has a lot of potential because its stats just give it so much to work with. It can be bulky, it can be strong, it can really be anything but fast.